Hi there, kindergarten kids. It's time for today's interactive read aloud. And today we're going to be reading the story, The Little House. This book is another book in our text set number 11, The Place You Call Home. The Little House was written by Virginia Lee Burton, and she wrote this book a very long time ago. She wrote this book in 1942. That was before my grandma was born. Boys and girls, when she wrote this book, she won an award. She won a Caldecott, which is one of the most prestigious awards that you can get when you are a storybook or a picture book writer. So she has gorgeous illustrations that I think you are going to enjoy. But this book has been around for a really long time. This is a new copy of the book, but when it was originally written a long time ago. If you ever want to know when a book was written, you can look inside and find the copyright. There's a little C with a circle around it, and it has a year. And that is the year that the book was written. This story, The Little House, has some words right here. It says her story. So the author is going to be referring to the little house as a her, kind of like you would be referring to as a person. So she's going to be talking about the house as it's a person. And look at the sun. It also has a face, like a person. And you can see the face also in the house. Do you see how the house looks like a face with two eyes for the windows and the nose and a smile where the mat is? Well, let's read The Little House. The Little House, story and pictures by Virginia Lee Burton. Boys and girls, look here. We see a house, and the house is not changing in the picture, but something else is. The forms of transportation in each picture has changed. So it starts with a horse, and we have a horse-drawn buggy, we have a carriage, and do you see how things are getting to be a little bit more electric and motorized? Until finally we get all the way through to a truck. So that's a clue that the author and illustrator is giving to the reader, that this story is going to pass through a lot of different times. To Dorothy. So that's who she's illustrated this book. That's who she's dedicated this book to. Once upon a time, there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she will live to see our great-great-grandchildren's great-great-grandchildren living in her." So if the story begins with once upon a time, do you think it's going to be a true story or a fiction story? Fiction. The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill and watched the countryside around her. She watched the sun rise in the morning, and she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before. But the little house stayed just the same. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, then back again to a thin old moon. And when there was no moon, she watched the stars. Way off in the distance, she would see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. So is the Little house in the city or in the country? It's in the country. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer and the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. She watched the grass turn green. She watched the buds on the trees swell and the apple trees burst into blossom. She watched the children playing in the brook. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves, and the white daisies cover the hill. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. Boys and girls, is the house a he or a she? The author is referring to the house as a she, so does that mean the author is a girl or a boy? A girl. Is it really a girl? No. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow and orange and red. She watched the harvest gathered and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. So it's fall or autumn time. In the winter, when the nights were long and the days short and the countryside covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating. Year followed year. The apple trees grew old and new ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city, and now at night the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. Now it's winter. What do we see the people on? Yeah, they're getting a sleigh ride. It's fun. One day, the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the winding country road. So a horseless carriage would be a carriage that didn't have a horse attached. Pretty soon, there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon, along came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the little house. Pretty soon, along came a steam shovel and dug a road through the hill covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. And then some trucks with little stones. Then some trucks with tar and sand. And finally, a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. It's a lot of work to get a road built. So is it changing? Is the world around the little house changing? It certainly is. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles going back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster now than before. So an automobile is another name for a vehicle or a car or a truck. And now that people can move faster in a car or a truck, it seems to be a lot busier. We see more homes. And notice there's power lines to get electricity out to the people's homes. Why do people need gas stations? They need the gas to fill up their cars. Good job. More roads were made, and the countryside was divided into lots. More houses and bigger houses, apartment houses and tenement houses, schools, stores, and garages spread over the land and crowded around the little house. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver, so she just stayed there and watched. So do you remember at the beginning of the story, the man who built it said that they couldn't sell her for gold or silver? Does she look out of place now? Yeah, she definitely does. What is going up all around the little house? Yeah, big buildings, a city. Do you think that the little house is going to like this? If no one is living in her, it might make her feel sad. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all day. This must be living in the city, thought the little house, and didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. They had to take all those things away to build the big city. These are street lights. Pretty soon, there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Pretty soon, there was a subway going back and forth underneath the little house. She couldn't see it, but she could feel and hear it. People were moving faster and faster. No one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance. It's hard to see the little house, boys and girls. Can you find it? Yeah, it's right in here. Pretty soon, they tore down the apartment houses and tenement houses around the little house and started digging big cellars, one on each side. The steam shovels dug down the 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other side. Pretty soon, they started building up. They built up 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on another. So a story, boys and girls, would be a floor. So if it's 25 stories, it would be 25 floors tall. More changes coming by the little old house. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or the stars at night at all because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. At night, she used to dream of the country and the fields of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken and her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, though she was just as good at the house as she ever was underneath. Then, one fine morning in spring, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house, but she didn't hurry by. There was something about the little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks just like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that little house was way out in the country, on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing around." Here's the little house. So they found out it was the very same house. So they went to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. Where do you think she wants to move the house to? Let's find out. The movers looked at the little house all over and said, "Sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built so well we could move her anywhere." So they jacked up the little house and put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. That is neat. Why do you think traffic had to stop? It's really big moving a giant house, right? At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, did I skip a page? No. At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along the big road, and they rolled along the little roads until they were way out in the country. So she was afraid at first, I think, being on the road. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here, they tried the little house there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of a field, and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-great-granddaughter. "That's just the place." "Yes, it is," said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. So they dug a hole to make a basement, and they put the house on top. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again, they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again, she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again, she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again, she was lived in and taken care of. Look at her big smile. I see people taking care of the yard, kids playing. Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country. Now we see some more transportation. Okay, boys and girls, this was a really long book, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. There are 3 changes that take place throughout this story. At the beginning of the book, we see that the little house was all by itself, and it was in the country. What happened to the little house in the middle of the story? Yeah, she was surrounded by the city. Was she happy being in the city? She wasn't. And no one was living in her to take care of her. So her house became shabby. That means it was falling apart. The outside was looking like it wasn't being taken care of. And then someone very special saw her. Do you remember who that was? That was the man who built the house. It was his great-great-granddaughter. And she decided that she needed to change the location of the house. And where did she place the house? Yep, she put it back in the country. Did you know that you can really move houses? Yeah, people can. You can move a house from one place to another. Okay, boys and girls, I love this story. I think it's really awesome. I like how we can see all the changes taking place that really did take place in America. And I love how when something is built really well, it can last a really long time. And I love how the author and illustrator used the house and gave it characteristics like people. Kind of makes us relate to it a little bit better than just thinking of the house as an object. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope that you were able to see some changes through time and the seasons, and I hope that you have a great